This conference will now be recorded.
All right, everyone. So today's workshop right now is understanding your assignment, deconstructing the prompt. So basically, with every assignment you get some kind of prompt. Okay, you get some kind of written instructions on how to do something. Now, I love this. I love this particular. What is it called again, guys? Ugh. Anyway, I like this because it's exactly what professors and teachers don't want. So when somebody on your discussion board writes as their response to a prompt, the sky is blue, and you as the student are required to respond to a certain amount of people's discussion board responses, and so the response would be, Emily, I totally agree with you with what you said. I like how you use the color blue as a form of imagery to describe the sky. That was such a powerful statement you said, Emily. Okay, so this is what people don't want to see, and this is what we see a lot. And I've even seen this in own classes that I've taken, where the response is to somebody else just agreeing with and just basically reiterating what they said instead of being an actual response to the thoughts or ideas. It's more of a response that's like kind of canned, if that makes any sense. So the other thing that I like this particular, oh, it's a meme. That's what it is. I like this one because it says to learn, students need to do something. So what that means is like learning is an active process. Your brain is in fact a muscle. And in order to use it and engage it, you have to do something while you're learning. So learning is not a passive skill. It's something that you do purposefully, all right, that you seek out when you're in education, when you're in college. You need to look at it as an activity, as something active, and not as something passive where you just read a book or you just listen to a lecture. You need to be internalizing that and learning from it and taking what you can from it and trying to think a little bit beyond that. So I think that's really interesting, the idea that learning should be an active process. So here are the basic beginnings, and this should be a habit anytime you're given an assignment or anytime you're given a discussion board prompt. The first thing you should do before you do anything else is read the assignment carefully. And sometimes you want to read it out loud. I do that sometimes when I'll go read an assignment. I'll be like, what did that just say? I'll read it out loud, and it helps me to make sense of it. So after reading the assignment, if you don't understand the assignment or some part of the assignment, make sure you ask your professor immediately. So you remember the presentation we did about emailing your professors what to do and what not to do. If you don't understand something, make sure you reach out to your professor immediately because you want to get that clarified right away. You don't want to wait till the night before when you actually sit down to do the assignment to try to understand what the assignment is. So make sure you read it in advance. Make sure you ask any questions you have to get clarification before you, or as soon as you can. You don't want to wait until the last minute because then it gets harder to get in touch with the professor or it gets harder to get that clarity. So the other thing you want to do is you want to look at what the prompt tells you. So the prompt is that description of the assignment. So there are information words that are often used within a prompt, and it asks you to demonstrate what you know about the subject, such as who, what, when, where, how, and why. So if the prompt uses the word define, okay, that means that you're giving a subject meaning. Sometimes you have to give more than one view on the subject's meaning. If another word, describe, if the word described is used in the prompt, that means you're expected to provide details about a subject by answering question words, such as who, what, when, where, how, and why. If it asks you to explain something, that means you're supposed to give reasons why or examples of how something has happened or what that concept is that you're trying to explain. If the word illustrate is used, and that can be kind of confusing because you're like, what, am I supposed to draw a picture? Illustrate is using descriptive words and descriptive methods of looking at the subject and to show how everything is connected. Okay, so it's kind of like a picture of words to illustrate something or a concept. If the prompt uses the word summarize, that means briefly list the important ideas about the subject that you've learned. If the prompt uses the word trace, which I rarely ever see that used, trace, it just basically means you need to outline how something has changed or developed from an earlier time to its current form. And if the prompt uses the word research, that means it's looking for you to gather material from outside sources about the subject, which basically means you need to look outside of your textbook, outside what you've done in class, go to other sources for information, and then you're going to have to look and kind of analyze that information in accordance to the rest of the prompt. And don't worry, we're going to go over all of this more. So if a prompt asks you to demonstrate how things are connected, it will use words like compare, contrast, apply, cause, relate. So that means that the prompt is asking you for a verbal demonstration. So comparing obviously is to show how two things are similar. Contrast, or two or more things, it could be more than two. Contrast, how two or more things are not similar. Apply means using details you've been given to explain and demonstrate how an idea, theory, or concept works in a particular situation. Cause, that's when you show how something happened or how something occurred. And relate is to show or describe the connections between things. Now, the reason we're going over these words is because they're important when you're looking at a prompt to understand what the prompt is asking you to do. And there are also interpretation words, okay? And these words are requesting more information and ideas about the subject or about whatever the assignment is. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the prompt is asking for your opinion about something. It's actually asking usually for you to, well, it's not that it's not asking your opinion. Okay, so I shouldn't say that. You can give an opinion, but you have to reinforce that opinion with evidence from elsewhere, and that evidence could be from your textbook. Okay, so it could be, somebody asks you to assess oh, I don't know, I can't even think of an example right now, but they're asking you to assess something, and you give your opinion, but then you also back it up with evidence from your textbook that gives your opinion meaning and backs it up. Uh, so remember examples, principles, definitions, or concepts from class and research. So sometimes you will want to bring in something that your professor or your instructor brought up in the class as an example of something, to use that to interpret the subject you're talking about. So some of the words that will be used for this is to assess something, which is summarize your opinion of the subject and measure it against something else. Prove and justify, give reasons or examples to demonstrate how or why something is the truth. Evaluate or respond. Now, when somebody's asking you to evaluate or respond, that is when they are asking your opinion. To say something is maybe good, bad, or some combination of both, but to also give examples and reasons. So it's not enough to say the sky is blue and that's your opinion. You have to back that up with why you know the sky is blue. It can't just be because, or that's what I see. You have to give more information on that. To synthesize something is when you put two or more things together that have not been put together another way, and you're not summarizing them, you're just synthesizing them by providing a reason for putting them together, and it runs all the way through the paper. So synthesis when you're writing means that you are taking these unrelated things and putting them together in a way that actually makes sense and using evidence to prove it. So when you get to Comp 2, if you haven't been to Comp 2 yet, one of the things you do when you're doing literary analysis is you're synthesizing, especially if you're using more than like two or more stories or poems, you're finding the commonalities in those poems or in those stories, and you're synthesizing information about both into one kind of example or one kind of explanation. And that's something that can be very tricky to understand. And I don't think you're going to see a lot of prompts at WCCC asking you to synthesize things, because that's usually a more higher level type of question, but you never know. So it's good to have some kind of understanding. And anytime you don't understand a word in your prompt and you're not sure what it means, definitely Google it. I do that all the time because I'm like, wait, I know what I think this means, but is it really what I mean? So I Google it and find out. So that's definitely a way to get help quickly if you're not sure about something. So if a prompt or a assignment is asking you to analyze something, that's how you determine how individual parts create or relate to the whole, figure out how something works and what it might mean or why it is important. So you're literally taking something and breaking it apart and describing it and analyzing it. To argue, if a prompt asks you to argue, that means that you need to take a side and defend it against the other side. So think of it as like, if you were debating something with somebody, or you're like having a conversation with somebody who has a different viewpoint of yours, and you have to sell your viewpoint, but you also have to document evidence that supports your viewpoint. So it's not necessarily that you're going to put down the other side, but you're going to find everything you can to support your side. So here's a sample prompt from a discussion board post, and it reads, in chapter 1 of your textbook, the author. Right, exactly, Barbara. In chapter 1 of your textbook, the author has noted that there are 3 philosophical questions related to psychology. These questions are actually the 3 major philosophical issues in psychology. Describe and explain one of these issues in your own words and give an example of that issue. And then it says you cannot use one from the book. So in looking at this, what do you think the important descriptive words are when it's talking about this part of it, the describe and explain part? What are the important words to note so that you understand what kind of response you have to give to this prompt? You can either unmute yourself and voice them out loud, or you can put them in the chat. Is everybody with me? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Can I answer?
No?
Oh, darn.
When looking at the second part of this prompt for a discussion board post, what are the important words you need to look at to understand how and what kind of response it's asking for?
Do you mean like to put it in your own words so you're not repeating exactly, like not quotes, basically?
Well, that is true because it's asking you to put it in your own words, right? So
Yeah.
that means you need to summarize or paraphrase something. This particular part of the prompt, you need to summarize and explain in your own words. So you're not going to be using quotations. You're going to be putting it in your own thoughts and your own words. That's exactly what I'm talking about. What else in this sentence, gives you a clue as to how you should answer or respond to this post?
The words describe and explain.
Exactly. So this prompt is telling you what kind of response you need to do. So you need to describe what it's asking for up here, or what's talking about up here, and explain one of these issues. So it says there are 3 major philosophical issues in psychology. So you're going to need to describe one of them and then explain one of them in your own words. And Isaiah, exactly, you got it right on the head. Bailey, that was great, exactly. So these are some other things to look at, and this includes the first part too. So when you're looking at the first part of the prompt, it tells you where to find what it is you're supposed to be responding to. Number 1, it's going to be in chapter 1 of your textbook for the class. And the best thing to do at that point would be to look at chapter 1 and find out what those 3 philosophical questions are, right? Because if you don't know what they are, then you're going to run into problems trying to respond. And it can't be 3 that you've made up, or 3 that you think work, or 3 that you've Googled. It needs to be 3 philosophical questions related to psychology from chapter 1 of your textbook. So that's important because you might if you read through this quickly, you might miss some of those key words that are telling you to use this from your textbook. And you might go ahead and Google, okay, what are some philosophical questions about psychology? And you might get a list of like a bunch of them and choose them and then answer it. And in that case, you might get points off because you're wrong. You're not following the prompt. The prompt says chapter 1 of your textbook. So then on the second part, the important words, as Bailey said, describe and explain one of these issues in your own words, and then also give an example of the issue. And you cannot use the example. So that's important too, and I should have underlined it. You cannot use one from the book. You cannot use an example from the book. That doesn't mean that you're not getting the information from your book. You can describe and explain in your own words from what is written in the textbook, but they're asking you for an example that's not in the textbook. So keep in mind when you're reading, if you don't read it carefully and look for these kinds of keywords, it can be harder to understand what you're supposed to do, number one. And number two, you could end up responding with the wrong information. And again, that affects your bottom line, which is your grade in the class, which is your grade for the assignment, which then affects, in the end, your assignment grades add up. And that can, depending on if you're not paying attention the whole class or not, if you're not responding correctly throughout the entire length of the class, that can affect your GPA. And we talked on day one about how your GPA is something that is going to help you get to where you want to go. So you want to do as much as you can to prevent that GPA from suffering, and it shouldn't be because you're not carefully reading the prompt. Now, I want you to respond in the chat. Does this make sense to you? Yes or no?
So far, everyone says yes, Lisa.
Gotcha. And can you understand, I want you to respond to this too. Can you understand why it's so important to make sure you understand and digest what the prompt is asking? Thank you, everybody. Perfect. I just need to know y'all are with me, because if you're not, I can go back and rediscuss it.
I just want to
Interject.
inject one thing. Is I took the Dr. Harrison's class online, totally online, and with the discussion boards and all this stuff. And I'm not your normal traditional student, so for me, I would have to read the questions sometimes 2 and 3 times just to make sure I knew what I was doing. And so just don't think you're abnormal. Just read it a few times, even if you have to read it out loud, read it out loud. And if you're doing a discussion board, see how the people in your class, interpret it also.
Yeah, and if you have questions you
And
don't
if you have
understand,
any questions, email your instructor.
absolutely.
They'll help you out. They're really very easy to do. And if it's totally an online class, it's a little different, but you'll be fine.
Absolutely, guys. So just remember that it's okay if you don't understand something. We kind of work solo in college because, you're doing your own work, you're doing your own assignments and things. But at the same time, because when you don't understand something, there's a chance that somebody else might not understand it. That does not mean you have to ask it in front of the entire class, Bailey, if you're not comfortable with that. But that means, make sure you clarify with the professor what it is they're asking. And I know for myself, if I've had more than one student ask me a question privately about something, and I realize, okay, maybe this isn't as clear as I thought it was when I put it up, I will send the entire class an email, or I'll post an announcement, clarifying it. Because if 2 people are not understanding it and they've taken the time to email me and let me know, then there's a chance that other people in the class didn't understand it either. So as an instructor, I want to make sure that what I'm giving you and what I'm providing you with makes sense and is understandable. Because if it's not and nobody tells me, my assumption is, okay, everybody understood this. And that's why I'm going to, throughout this program, I'll ask you a lot, does that make sense? Because something that makes sense to me and is clear to me might not make sense to the rest of you. I could be the only one who understands it, and that does happen sometimes. So that's why it's really important to make sure you ask questions in everything within the classroom. I'm going to end the recording now. If I can figure out how to end my recording.